I'm going to kick us off now. My name is Melissa Moody. I am a co-founder of Wednesday Women, and Wednesday Women is very proud to help present this webinar today. Wednesday Women is a group that is designed to amplify and uplift extraordinary executive women leaders. We help executive women leaders show up even more in your social feeds, keynotes, panels, and podcasts. And this week in particular, you might have noticed for Wednesday Women, we've kicked off a whole 2 weeks focused on women and investing in particular. And in the theme of investing and financial savviness, we're very, very pleased to present today's webinar in partnership with our incredible folks that have been partners and sponsors for us, Monument Wealth Management. Today we have Jessica Gibbs and Emily Harper. They are both private wealth advisors and partners at Monument Wealth Management. And Monument is based in the DC area. They joined us at Wednesday Women as a corporate sponsor in May. They first started following Wednesday Women and noticed that our missions were very, very aligned. They connected with Wednesday Women's mission about celebrating and elevating executive women in an authentic, real way. You know, today Wednesday Women uses the hashtag Real Talk, and Monument likes to use the hashtag Unfiltered Advice, which you're going to get a lot of today. No BS, no jargon, no egos. We're here to talk real talk. So Monument in particular focuses on helping high earning executives and founders build wealth with purpose. And Emily and Jessica were both featured Wednesday Women earlier this year, so we know they bring the expertise and the authenticity. First, I'd like you to meet Jessica. She is a first top line, a mom of 2 boys. She is also a certified financial planner, vice president, and partner at Monument. She is also the co-host of Monument's Off the Wall podcast, which is a show that helps founders and executives build wealth with purpose. I have listened to it. I love the show. Highly recommended from a personal standpoint. Prior to becoming a financial planner, Jessica worked in philanthropy. Charitable planning continues to be one of her personal interest areas. And her partner in crime, their words, not mine, Emily Harper, is also a certified financial planner, vice president, and partner at Monument. She completed her MBA at Darden. She is a mom of 2 chocolate labs, so also near and dear to my heart. Rory and Rosie are their names. She is the resident tax expert at Monument and loves to help people with tax planning, so she might be your new favorite person. She also loves wine and travel and loves helping people design their whole life experiences alongside their wealth plan. Now, a lot of Emily and Jessica's experience is working with executives at publicly traded companies, but many of those common mistakes and pitfalls apply whether you work at a large company, public company, or a private company. So for everyone here today, thank you for putting where you're from. If you just joined us, please drop your name and where you're from in the chat. And feel free to also drop anything about whether you're at a small private company, a large public company, any context that will help us really kind of hone in on who we're talking to. I'm going to pass it over now to Jessica to kick things off in the right way for financial planners with a little bit of legal disclosure, and then they're going to hop right into the meat of the chat. One quick logistical note, please feel free to put questions in the chat, but we're going to probably save those questions for the Q&A at the end. So we'll be looking for your questions, but we'll try to answer them mostly at the end. Jessica, over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Yes, before we dive in, as Melissa said, and as you probably can imagine, financial services is a highly regulated industry. So we wanted to preface our presentation with a few important disclosures, including that no portion of this presentation serves as receipt of or substitute for personalized advice. Copies of Monument's disclosure documents can be found on our website, and please see important disclosures at the end of this presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to Emily to kick us off.
Great. Now that we've gotten compliance out of the way, thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Melissa, for the introductions and for everyone taking time out of your day to attend today. Thank you. Hopefully you learned something new. I think we're all here because we know that equity compensation can be a powerful component to building wealth, but we've seen executives miss opportunities to maximize its potential. And to help illustrate the unique challenges and pitfalls that come with stock-based compensation, we're going to start with a hypothetical case study of a couple. So meet the Edwards. They came to us as a married couple in their mid-50s. We always think it's really important to think about the bigger picture and context when we're thinking about stock-based compensation as a component of a bigger picture. So The Edwards came to us. They knew they wanted to retire in the next 7 years or so around the age of 60, and they just weren't sure if this was feasible. They were used to having high incomes and living a great lifestyle with careers in government relations for large publicly traded corporations. Planning for retirement, they knew it could be really hard to replicate that lifestyle when they no longer had that level of income. Along the way, they were maxing out retirement plans, they were investing in real estate, but they just weren't sure if they had been doing enough to really meet that goal of retirement. The big piece of the puzzle for them was they had been kicking the can down the road on a major driver of their net worth, which was unexercised stock options that were expiring at the end of the calendar year. So we had about 6 months to plan and take action. And, put yourself in their shoes, or maybe you can see a little bit of yourself in them. Can you imagine having $1.5 million of your net worth tied to a single company and not thinking about it on a regular basis? Believe it or not, this is something we commonly see. So today, we want to talk about the common mistakes and pitfalls, and we'll revisit the Edwards and their situation along the way as we highlight 3 of the most common mistakes that we see when it comes to building wealth with stock-based compensation. So the first thing we'll talk about is not understanding the tax ramifications. This is a really big thing. The second mistake, mindsets that can cause you to take on too much risk. And the third, going it alone or not having the right resources and team in place. So before we begin, we just wanted to gauge people's understanding of restricted stock and stock options. So if you want to just put in the chat, how would you rate your understanding of restricted stock and stock options, from 1 being poor to 5 being excellent? And I'm going to go ahead, and while people are putting that in the chat, we're going to go ahead and just start talking about mistake number 1, which is not understanding the tax ramifications. So when you hear the word stock or equity, you probably think investment. And while your stock-based compensation might grow your wealth over time like an investment, from a tax standpoint, it's really just non-cash compensation. And compensation is generally not subject to favorable tax rates like capital gains from investments might be. So I will say at the start of this, we don't have time to talk about every difference between restricted stock and stock options today. On the next slide, we will have a stock compensation cheat sheet with a lot more detail that you can download with a QR code. And I'll also preface this by saying there's many different kinds of stock-based compensation out there. We're not going to cover every single thing today, but usually the stock compensation is going to fall into one of two categories, some form of restricted stock or options. So we'll start by talking about restricted stock. And really the major differences between restricted stock and stock options are the degree of control that you have and how those awards are taxed. So with restricted stock, you can see an example of this on the slide. Typically, restricted stock is granted as a set number of shares, and those shares will vest over time in tranches. So here you see 1,000 shares granted, 250 shares are going to vest per year over 4 years. There's a lot of different flavors of restricted stock. The award might simply be time-based, meaning you just have to be employed when the grant vests to receive shares of stock. They could be performance-based, meaning the company has to reach some predetermined metrics for you to receive the full amount of shares in each vesting period. So regardless of the kind that you have, on the vesting date for each tranche, you'll receive shares, and the value of those shares will be taxable as ordinary income. And the value is based on whatever the stock is worth that day that it vests. When I say ordinary income, think about tax brackets and the rates that you see associated with those tax brackets. This could be as high as 37% under the current tax code, at least for federal taxes, for a lot of high income earners, but generally we see a range of 24 to 37%. And again, this all happens outside of your control. There is one exception to lack of control, and that's called the 83B election. This allows you to claim the value of your grant as taxable income in the year that you receive the grant. So before your shares even vest, you can claim the fair market value of the stock that day and the amount of shares you get in that grant as taxable income and pay taxes on it at that time. This may benefit you if you expect the value of the stock to increase significantly, but there's a ton of risk in this. If for some reason the grant doesn't vest, or say you leave the company or you don't hit performance metrics, you don't get the value of your tax payment back. So you're kind of counting your chickens before your eggs hatch. And I've really not seen anybody do this in practice. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen or that it can't happen. Now, on the other hand, after we talk about restricted stock, there's stock options. And the word option in the name should tell you there's a little bit more flexibility from a tax standpoint. First, you can choose whether or not to even exercise your options after they're vested. And second, you can choose and control to some degree when you exercise your options and how much to exercise in a given year. So we're going to talk about non-qualified stock options, or NQSOs, and incentive stock options, ISOs. They're very similar, but the biggest difference is what happens at vesting from a tax standpoint. So again, with options, both NQSOs and ISOs, you have the right, but not the obligation to purchase the shares of your company stock at a given strike price at some point in the future. And the strike price is usually the current value of the stock at the time of the grant. So ideally, the value of the stock would go up over time and you would benefit from the difference between your strike price and what the stock is worth in the future when you exercise your options. And that's called the bargain element. Now, that bargain element is treated a little bit differently for those NQSOs and ISOs. NQSOs are a little bit less favorable from a tax standpoint. That bargain element is taxed as ordinary income. If you hold the stock after you've purchased it, and then you sell it in the future, you'll also have capital gains taxes on any gains above your cost basis. And your cost basis for this stock is usually whatever you paid to purchase it, your exercise costs, plus the amount of compensation that you had to claim as that bargain element. So those capital gains above your cost basis are usually taxed at a rate of either 0, 15, or 20% under our current tax code, depending on your income. For most of our audience, it's probably going to be 15 to 20%. Now, ISOs are a little bit better from a tax standpoint, but they're not offered as frequently as NQSOs. With ISOs, you likely won't owe taxes when you exercise your options. There may be some nuance related to the alternative minimum tax, which we could spend a whole hour talking about. So we're not going to dive into AMT today, but generally with ISOs, you're not going to owe taxes at the time that the option vests and you choose to exercise it. The taxes come into play when you eventually sell your shares of your ISOs. And typically you're striving for something called qualifying disposition, which means you've held the shares long enough after you exercised your options to qualify for capital gains treatment on that bargain element and the amount of gain that you have above that bargain element. So typically, again, that's going to be 0, 15, 20%. And ideally, you eliminate that ordinary income or short-term capital gains treatment on ISOs. So on a quick practical note with options in general, particularly non-qualified stock options, a lot of times executives won't want to come out of pocket to purchase their stock, or sometimes they don't want to come out of pocket to purchase their stock when they exercise the options, and they really just want to benefit from that bargain element. You can do what's called cashless exercise and receive that bargain element as cash instead of receiving shares of the company's stock. So if you're really just looking to benefit from that increase in value and want to do something else with the funds, that's always a possibility without adding future capital gains to the mix. So what's the danger in not planning for taxes on stock compensation or not having some understanding of these concepts? Let's revisit the Edwards. Um, One of their big mistakes was not planning for taxes along the way and taking action over the many years that they owned vested options. So they had to exercise all of their remaining shares in a single tax year during their highest income earning years. This pushed them into the highest tax bracket, which at that time was 37%. They were also DC residents, so they paid taxes of around 9% on that bargain element. So you can see how that takes a big bite out of the post-exercise amount that's available. This took the after-tax value down to about $805,000 from $1 million. And if you're only thinking about the pre-tax value of your options after exercise costs, you may be disappointed with what's left. Planning over time and exercising in increments can increase the total after-tax value of your options. One other quick note, the Edwards didn't have restricted stock in the mix, only those options. But one other common mistake we see with restricted stock is just not paying enough in taxes throughout the year to account for that ordinary income component of the stock that's vesting. Usually a company will withhold some percentage or sell some shares as they vest to cover taxes, often at a rate of about 24%. Most high earners are in higher tax brackets than 24%. So this can create a nasty surprise in April, a big tax bill, penalties or interest for underpayment. Ideally, it's nice to avoid writing a big check in April, especially if you don't have cash on hand to cover that. So what can you do to take more control? It comes down to really being organized in a few different ways. One way to organize for the current year is just keeping tabs on your household income throughout the year, especially if you have restricted stock. Pay attention to what's being withheld from your pay, what's being sold when stock vests to cover the taxes, and whether that percentage likely aligns with your marginal rate. When you're thinking about income for the year, don't forget things like interest from savings accounts. That's become a lot more common the past few years. Capital gains you may have realized elsewhere. It all adds up to taxable income. So if you find that you probably haven't been paying enough taxes along the way, you can make estimated payments. You could also potentially adjust your withholding on your pay for the rest of the year to try to get closer to where your tax bill might be. There's also some longer range organization that comes into play, and that is mapping out your vesting schedule and projecting how much will vest each year across your various awards. It's common with restricted stock to get multiple grants over multiple years, and you may have multiple tranches vesting at once. So mapping those things out and then combining that with a projection of just what your future income might look like. Salary increases, bonuses for you and your spouse if you're a joint filer. What you're really looking for is whether there's a sweet spot for exercising your options in smaller increments over time to lessen the tax impact and actually maximize the after-tax value, unlike the Edwards. And finally, just have general awareness of the after-tax value of your restricted stock and options. And don't forget to account for exercise costs for your options. That will really help you understand just how much will be available to fund your goals and give you a realistic expectation, a realistic sense of what you should expect.
Great, thank you, Emily. So I want to do another poll before we jump into mistake number 2. And I want everyone to kind of jump in, put into the chat, how risk averse or risk tolerant would you say you are when it comes to your overall financials? With 1 being you're very risk averse or 5, you're very risk tolerant. Seeing like 2s, 3s, 4s, kind of somewhere in the middle. Okay, so when your company stock is on the rise, I bet you're feeling pretty good. But I want everyone to do a gut check. How would you feel if you saw your stock going down in value by 10%? 20%? What if it was more? And what if that was money that you were counting on for house down payment, college tuition, to retire in a few years? So mistake number 2 we often see is around mindset. Emily and I tend to see 3 common mentalities with executives who own company stock. A belief that the stock price is just going to keep rising, a fear of missing out on future growth, and a resistance to selling stock because they don't want to pay taxes on the gains. But when you have these mindsets of, I don't want to miss out on gains, I don't want to pay taxes, you miss seeing the big risks that you may also be taking, and in particular, concentration risk. So concentration risk is the risk of amplified losses that may occur from having a large portion of your portfolio be in one particular investment. So everyone who's listening to this, I really encourage you to do the math. So I want you to add up your entire portfolio. And by that, I mean add up your taxable investments, your retirement savings, your company stock, don't include your house, and figure out what is the percentage of your portfolio that your company stock is. So at Monument, we tend to generally recommend that clients' company stock be no more than 10 to 20% of their portfolio, depending on their risk tolerance and their risk capacity. So thinking about this a different way, your compensation and your company stock, they're always going to be tied to your employer. So you'll always be concentrated in this company. And that's why it's important to be actively thinking about how to diversify your financial life. And equally as important as thinking strategically about accumulating stock compensation, it's also having a sell strategy. And by this, I mean being systematic in the way that you're taking your wins or leveraging your losses and reducing your concentration risk. A good wealth advisor is going to make sure that you aren't violating wash sale rules as you're doing this. So what is a wash sale? Let's decode that jargon. Wash sales are when you sell a security at a loss for the tax benefit, but then you turn around and you buy that same or a similar security. If you do this within 30 days before or after a sale, you won't be able to take that loss for the security on your tax return. And wash sales, I want to highlight, they particularly come into play if you're purchasing company stock on a monthly basis, let's say as part of an employee stock purchase plan. So if you own publicly traded stock, you can leverage tools such as direct indexing to help you work out of, which is just a fancy way of saying sell over time, concentrated stock positions. And if you have private company stock, direct indexing can still be a helpful tool for diversifying around your industry. So what is direct indexing? This gets a little in the weeds, but stick with me because it is a really interesting concept. So direct indexing involves using individual stocks to replicate the performance of an index. So for example, the S&P 500, which I'm pretty sure everyone is familiar with. So to break this down, you can either buy a mutual fund or an exchange traded fund, often called an ETF, that owns a lot of different companies or sectors. So think of it like a basket with lots of different holdings in it. You own the basket, you don't own the individual holdings. Alternatively, you can buy individual shares of what's best for you, not the whole bundle, and still be able to potentially replicate the performance of that overall index. So if we go back to our S&P 500 example, you don't necessarily need to go out and purchase all 503 stocks that are in the S&P 500. You may be able to get a similar return owning significantly fewer stocks. And when you own individual stocks, there are more opportunities to take advantage of incremental tax losses that happen throughout the year. And this is what's called tax loss harvesting. So when you own an ETF or a mutual fund, you can't tax loss as frequently because you would need that whole fund to decrease in value from when you bought it. And just kind of circling around, when you have more tax losses, you have more leverage to offset those losses against gains that you may have in your concentrated company stock. So a few other interesting things about direct indexing: it adjusts for your unique tax situation and any specific investment preferences or restrictions you have. So for example, if you have environmental social governance preferences, those are often called ESG preferences. And if you want to avoid investing more in your company or in your industry, direct indexing can also manage around wash sales like we were talking before. So Monument relies on advanced software to do direct indexing for our clients. All this is to say is that direct indexing is a very powerful tool, but it's very difficult to do on your own. So a good wealth advisor can provide a lot of value in this space. Back to our case study. So this client who came to us at the 11th hour before his options expired, he had significant concentration risk. His unexercised options accounted for about 30% of their household portfolio, and they had additional stock from an employee stock purchase plans. They are the classic example of a mindset around not wanting to miss out on gains, but also this emotional attachment to a company that he contributed to in a meaningful way over the course of his career. So luckily for them, the company stock did well, but that's not everyone necessarily is going to have that same experience. So this client, they didn't think about diversification for 10 plus years, and it makes you wonder what other investment opportunities they could potentially missed out on. Stock compensation really is an ongoing cycle of planning cash flows of future stock grants and vesting schedules, planning for taxes when you receive grants, exercise options, and sell your vested shares, and planning for diversifying your portfolio. If you're going to build wealth with purpose, you need to integrate all these moving pieces into your wealth plan. All right, last one, mistake number 3 is not having support. So I know everyone joining this, you're a busy professional, you're likely juggling too many tasks already. You need to focus your time and your attention on what you're good at and build the team of experts around you. The successful executives that we work with typically have 3 people giving them ongoing advice: an accountant, a wealth advisor, and an executive coach. So I want to start with the accountant. We often ask our clients about their CPA, and they're like, yeah, I have one, but I don't love them. And that's because most CPAs tend to be transactional. They really are just focused on filing your tax return. But a good CPA is going to do tax planning throughout the year so that when you file your return, you know you've taken advantage of all the opportunities that you can. And by tax planning, I mean they're looking at your taxes from a multi-year perspective. They're giving you advice on how to leverage tax-advantaged accounts, and they're keeping current on tax laws and legislations as it changes and how it could potentially affect you. Other things I would encourage you to look for is, are they proactive in reaching out to you? And also, are they interested in working as a member of your wealth team? And by that, I mean just not working in a silo, that they do want to work with your other advisors. Second is your wealth advisor. A wealth advisor is more than just an investment manager. A great wealth advisor is someone who's thinking about your full landscape of your wealth picture: cash flow, taxes, education funding, estate planning, risk management, charitable planning, as well as your stock compensation. And they're also thinking about what is the purpose for this wealth that you're working so hard to build. I'd say a great wealth advisor is also acting as a quarterback who's coordinating all the members of your wealth team. So such as your accountant, your attorney, your insurance broker, etc. An excellent wealth advisor, in our opinion, is someone who's going to help you properly understand your risks, is going to reduce the anxiety of the unknown, give you more control over your time and options, and answer your specific questions, not everyone else's. Lastly, an executive coach. So I think most high achievers, they know that they're capable of more, but they may not necessarily know how to push to that next level. And this is particularly a problem if your stock compensation is performance-based. So at a certain point, skills, they're not the problem. Driving different results is going to require changes in mindset, behavior, and your personal leadership practices. And this is why you hire a coach. A good coach, they're not just going to tell you what to do. Instead, they're going to guide you through self-discovery and arm you with feedback and a personal plan to transform your behavior and achieve your personal and professional goals. So back to our case study one last time. This high-earning couple, they never enlisted the help of a wealth manager until they were in their 50s. They had an accountant who handled their tax filing, but that was about it. So they weren't taking that holistic view of their wealth. And by looking at their stock compensation in a vacuum and not considering it as part of their overall wealth plan, this couple came to us with a lot of anxiety about their ability to retire and also a shorter time horizon to make adjustments that might have been needed to meet their goals. So I'll hand it back to Emily to wrap us up.
Thank you, Jessica. Before we get to Q&A, we just wanted to recap the key takeaways that we hope you got today. One major thing is preparing for taxes and understanding the tax implications of your type of stock compensation to avoid surprises and optimize your tax strategy. And this can also help you understand the real value of a compensation package if you're considering job offers. It's important to know how these different forms of compensation work and what they're really going to mean for your bottom line. 2, managing risk. So limiting your ownership in company stock to 10 to 20% of your portfolio to reduce concentration risk. And keep in mind other forms of company stock you may have beyond your stock-based compensation, like those employee stock purchase plans Jessica mentioned. Don't let mindset and emotions keep you from meeting your goals for your wealth. Develop a strategic plan. So create a comprehensive plan for exercising your options and selling stock to minimize tax impacts and enhance after-tax value. This can also give you peace of mind that you're on track to realize the purpose of your wealth, whether that be retirement, a vacation home, or a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Planning for stock-based compensation is an ongoing cycle of managing cash flows, taxes, and diversifying to build a strategy that advances your goals. And finally, don't go it alone. Build a great team. An accountant and wealth advisor are valuable partners in the strategic planning and wealth building. And engaging an executive coach can help you level up and meet performance metrics that impact the value of your compensation. So we hope that you learned something new today. We really appreciate you joining us. We'll have some time for Q&A, but don't forget to scan the QR code to get our cheat sheet on restricted stock, non-qualified stock options, and incentive stock options.